What's up, everybody? I'm Susan Davis. I'm the Congress reporter here at NPR, and we're doing a Facebook Live today to talk to you about congressional races. We thought it would be a good time because we just wrapped up a couple of primary races this week in Arizona and Florida for congressional races. And traditionally, the Labor Day weekend is when a lot of voters, stop thinking as much about the presidential and start thinking a little bit about how they're going to vote down the ballot this November. So let's start with a couple of basics about what 2016 is looking like. What do we talk about when we say down the ballot? What are we talking about there? We tend to say that what we're talking about is Senate races and House races. And this is what makes up your Congress, which is going to play an incredibly influential role in determining what the next president can or can't do in their first term. So let's start with the Senate because that's a little bit more where the drama is this year. Every 2 years, there's 100 seats in the Senate, right? There's going to be a little bit of math, so bear with me. Every 2 years, there's 100 seats in the Senate, but only a third of them are up for re-election. This is so the Senate is a little bit more of a stable place. And this year, there's 34 Senate races that will be on the ballot this year. 24 of those are Republican-held seats, and 10 of them are Democratic-held seats. Now, of this orbit of 34 races, there's only about 12 of them, about a dozen, that are actually competitive. We don't know whether a Republican or a Democrat is going to win them this fall. And those 12 races are going to decide the majority of the Senate. Right now, the Senate is controlled by Republicans. They have a 54-seat majority out of the 100 seats in the Senate, and they're working hard to hold on to it. They are currently not favored to hold on to that majority. They're in a tough spot in a lot of these races. So the reason why you hear a lot more about Senate races is it's more of a question of who's going to be in control. Across the chamber, across the Capitol, we have the House of Representatives. Now, there's 435 seats in the House, and because it's the People's House, all 435 of them are up every 2 years, every single one of them. The thing about the House is most of those races aren't that competitive in a general election. Most members of Congress face the only real competitive election in a primary, which is when they have to run against other Republicans or other Democrats for their nomination. Most of those races have already been decided, and of this 435 seats, right now, although this can change because this is when the landscapes of the House and Senate really start to engage, there's only about 55 seats in the House that are truly up for grabs, that we don't know who's going to win in November. So think about that. There's 435 seats, only about 55 of them are competitive. Republicans control the House right now, too. They have their highest majority since Herbert Hoover was president. So they have a lot of ways to go before they lose the majority. They have 247 seats. So that means the Democrats that have 188 seats would need to pick up 30 seats to take control, because you need 218 seats to have the majority. Why? 218 is half of 435. Right now, House Speaker Paul Ryan is in control of the House. Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell is in control of the Senate. And there is less of an expectation that the House is going to flip this year. Pretty much everyone agrees that Republicans are going to lose seats, particularly because their majority is so high right now. So they don't really have room to grow. They're going to come down a little bit. And national election years tend to be better years for Democrats. So they're not expected to lose the majority. But again, there are some people who say if this race really starts to tilt, if Democrats start breaking in a lot of these races across the board, if Hillary Clinton expands her lead in the presidential race, she could potentially cause what we would refer to in politics as a wave. And a wave is when the person at the top of the ticket is performing so strong, they're going to wash over every race down the ballot and take their party in with them. We don't see a wave yet this year. There's a lot going on in the electorate. And there's a lot of people who I think this year, maybe more than others, are willing to split their tickets or vote third party. So there's a lot of churn in congressional races. And as I said before, most people, if you're paying attention to this election, Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton have probably been dominating the news and dominating what you're thinking about. And it's only now, about 10 weeks out, that a lot of voters start to think about, okay, who else is up on the election? Do I have a senator up for election? Who is my House member? And which way am I going to vote in that election? So I don't know, we're going to take some questions, and happy to talk about any specific races or broader trends or themes that are happening this year.
Yeah, so one question is, since there's 435 House seats why aren't those races more competitive? Why aren't they more competitive?
Right. So the House is of the 435 seats. There are 435 districts, we would call them, and these districts all have the exact same number of people in them. So there's equal representation across the country. I don't remember the exact number of people, but it's roughly 680,000 people in every congressional district. And every 10 years, we redraw those lines to reflect where people live. People move all over. You know, California has more congressional districts now than they did 30 years ago. Arizona is a place where people are moving, where they've gotten more and more districts. We've also seen people leave places like the Northeast, you know, New York, Pennsylvania. These are places in the House that used to be way more dominant. And as people move away from these places, their influence in Congress changes. So the thing is, most people in this country tend to live in like-minded places. So right now, the ways the lines are drawn, Democrats in the House are mainly centered in cities and the suburbs. And Republicans have rural America and part of the exurbs. And when we draw these lines, a lot of these lines are drawn by partisans. And when we say partisans, it's a Republican or Democrat who controls the process. In a state like Ohio, for instance, when they got to redraw the lines, the legislature was controlled by Republicans. So Republicans are going to have a partisan advantage redrawing those lines. And it gives them an advantage in their congressional makeup. You draw the lines, so you just make sure you have a little bit more of a Republican tilt to a district. Or if Democrats are in control, a little bit more of a Democratic lift to the election. Republicans controlled more of the state legislatures when they redrew the lines after the 2010 census. So they had a little bit of a built-in advantage. So part of this is that a lot of these congressional districts are kind of baked in, that these are districts that a really strong Republican district, if it voted 70% for Mitt Romney in 2012, pretty much no Democrats ever going to win there. And vice versa. There's districts in places like New York City that voted 86% for Barack Obama. No Republicans ever going to win there. So both parties have seen an advantage in building in a baseline number of districts, the number of districts that are completely out of reach. There used to be a lot more of them. In 2000, there was about 150 swing seats in the House that any party could control depending on election factors. Today, there's probably only about 90 to 95. That's a 40% drop in swing districts in just a 15-year period. So that's one of the reasons when you hear people talk about why the House is more polarized, why it's more partisan, is that there's fewer members that think that they could lose their election because the opposite party might vote them out. We've created a situation where more lawmakers are more beholden to their base, to their most liberal or their most conservative voters to hold on to their jobs, which means you're going to be more liberal or more conservative in Congress.
And lots of people on Facebook are asking about gerrymandering.
Gerrymandering.
What that is and how it plays a role.
Yeah.
We're talking about it
Yep. A little bit. So gerrymandering is the term that we use that when partisan people draw lines to their partisan advantage. Gerrymandering is absolutely an issue in reducing the number of competitive races in the House. It's also something that both parties have used to their advantage. It isn't really a Republican thing or a Democratic thing. Both parties like to do it to build in their advantages. Part of the problem where it's not all just gerrymandering, you can't blame gerrymandering for all of the problems, is that Democrats in particular have tended they live more compactly now. So if you have to draw lines around population groups, they're living closer and closer together. There's fewer places that are politically mixed. One of the ways the world has changed is that if you are a Democrat, you want to live with more like-minded people, and you have more options now than you did 100 years ago to move to those places. And the same thing's true for conservatives. If you want to live in a more conservative place, you can go there. You don't have to stay where you are. So we have there's a great book called The Big Sort, if you're interested in learning more about that explains how we've kind of divided up amongst ourselves. That yes, our politics are more partisan. Yes, our politicians are more partisan, but so are we.
And back to sort of more general questions. Josh on Facebook wants to know, can you ballpark the probability of Democrats taking over the House or the Senate?
Sure.
Yeah.
So, okay, so this is a little bit of my own reporting, but also what a lot of nonpartisan election forecasters like the Cook Political Report and the Rothenberg Political Report are also thinking. And everybody's pretty much in the same ballpark right now. In the Senate is much more competitive. Democrats have a much greater advantage of taking over the Senate there. Republicans have 54 seats, so that means Democrats need to net 4 seats. They're already halfway there. Pretty much every nonpartisan election forecaster believes they're going to take over Illinois and Wisconsin because those are such heavily Democratic states, and Hillary Clinton is favored to win there by double digits, probably. So that means they only need 2 more, and they've got 10 options to win them. And that in every Senate race right now, every competitive Senate race, the 12 that I referenced at the beginning, the Democratic candidate's doing better than the Republican candidate. So the odds are in their favor. The only 2 states right now, and this can change, right now where the Republican candidate is doing better is Ohio, where incumbent Republican Senator Rob Portman is running against Ted Strickland, who's a former Democratic governor, and in Florida, where Republican Senator Marco Rubio just won his primary last night. He was going to retire from the Senate, but when he lost the presidential race, he was convinced by party leaders to get back in. So he's running again. And he's going to face a congressman named Patrick Murphy. Both Portman and Rubio are leading, but Hillary Clinton's leading in both of their states. So what that tells us is they are 2 examples of senators who are drawing from voters who say they're going to vote for Hillary Clinton and then split their ticket and vote for Rob Portman and Marco Rubio.
And in the Senate races, of the dozen that are maybe up in the air, which are ones that people should really be paying attention to?
Okay, so I would say that the 5 right now that are really the focus between Republicans and Democrats are New Hampshire, where it's incumbent Senator Kelly Ayotte, and she is facing the governor, Maggie Hassan, and that's a top Senate race. Pennsylvania, where there is incumbent, it's my home state. Hello to anybody watching from Pennsylvania. Incumbent Republican Senator Pat Toomey is facing a political newcomer. She's never held office before. It's a Democrat named Katie McGinty. Ohio, I mentioned, with Rob Portman and Ted Strickland. Florida, with Marco Rubio and Patrick Murphy. And North Carolina is an interesting race that has broken late. The senator there is a Republican named Richard Burr. He has been in Congress since 1994. He was in the House first. And he's running against a relative unknown named Deborah Ross, who only in recent weeks has suddenly made this an even race or leading him. And what that tells us in North Carolina is that race is tracking pretty closely to the presidential. So Hillary Clinton has taken the lead in North Carolina, and we've seen the Democratic candidate there take the lead over Burr in some polls. And this is where the top of the ticket can play an incredibly influential role in down ballot races, where Hillary Clinton's strength there is clearly what's lifting this candidate up over an established veteran Republican incumbent. Partly North Carolina has a tough climate right now for Republican candidates because so many of the state-specific issues that they've seen there with their transgender bathroom law and the controversy there with their governor. So there's a lot going on in that state, but Democrats are doing well there, and a lot of that has to do with the top of the ticket. So that is a case in which the top of the ticket is lifting candidates up versus dragging them down.
And are we expecting to see more split ballot tickets this year? And if so, what is the thinking behind that? Why would people do that?
Okay, so why do people split their tickets? The thing is that most people today don't split their tickets anymore. I think the 2012 election, we saw the lowest level of ticket splitting in probably a generation since like the Watergate era. And that means that most people that are going to go into the voting booth this November, if you're going to vote for Donald Trump, you're more likely to vote for every Republican down the ballot. And if you're going to vote for Hillary Clinton, the same is true. I think it's in the high 90% of the number of voters that do that. So it's really only a fraction of people that are going to split their tickets. One thing that people that study split ticket voting, and I've written a little bit about this, think is that one of the many things that makes 2016 unique is it's still fundamentally an election between 2 presidential candidates that most of this country does not like. So you're less likely to vote down the ballot because you just are feeling gross about the top of the ticket in one way or another. So in particular, I think that there is a potential for Republican candidates to pull from Hillary Clinton's support. And we are seeing that in polls in places like Ohio and Florida, and a little bit in Pennsylvania as well, and even in New Hampshire, where you see Clinton's lead is bigger over Trump's, and that the Republicans, though, are staying competitive down the ballot. And again, that's what tells us is some combination of people are going to cast a ballot for Hillary Clinton and cross the ballot and vote for Republicans in Congress. I've talked to professors who have studied this, who they say that one thing that they think people think is that if you're voting for Clinton but you're not that happy about it, you might justify your vote or vote for the Republican to say, okay, I'm going to balance out my ticket, or I want to check on her power, or these are voters that might have voted for a Republican this year, but they're not Trump Republicans, and they're still going to vote Republican down the ballot, but they can't vote for Trump specific. It's less likely we're going to see split ticket the other way. We're just not seeing any data that suggests that there is a significant number of people that are going to vote for Donald Trump for president and then Patrick Murphy in Florida. There's just less of a nexus between those voters, partly because Democrats are much more opposed to Donald Trump than a lot of Republicans are opposed to Hillary Clinton. She has been able to get people who self-identify as Democrats much more united behind her than Donald Trump has been able to get self-identified Republicans to unite behind him. There's more room for squishy voters there.
And I think we're ready to wrap it up. Do you have any final thoughts?
I would say, the one thing that we know about congressional races in national election years is they don't tend to break until about 3 or 4 weeks before Election Day. So a lot of these are still very fluid, and they could go in any direction. And that if you're interested in looking at these races and really want to know what's competitive, probably around October 15th, we're going to have a much better sense of, is there going to be a wave, and what's it going to look like for the next president? So I think we'll leave it there. Thanks everybody for watching. It was really fun. And you can, if you go to clerk.house.gov, if you don't know who your House congressman is, you can go there and put in your zip code and they will tell you who it is. And if you don't know what state you live in, I don't know if I can help you, but you should know where your senators are just by doing a simple Google or go to senate.gov. I'm Susan Davis and I cover Congress for NPR. Thank you for watching.